Adrift by Mark Nepo. Everything is beautiful and I am so sad. This is how the heart makes a duet of wonder and grief. The light spraying through the lace of the fern is as delicate as the fibers of memory forming their web around the knot in my throat. The breeze makes the birds move from branch to branch as this ache makes me look for those I've lost in the next room, in the next song, in the laugh of the next stranger. In the very center, under it all, what we have that no one can take away and all that we've lost face each other. It's there that I'm adrift, feeling punctured by a holiness that exists inside everything. I am so sad, and everything is so beautiful. People say sometimes that Unitarian Universalism is an Easter faith with no Good Friday, a faith of boundless ultimate optimism in the goodness of all things and the hope for transformation. Easter, without the dark night of the soul, without the reality of suffering that pierces through everything. Good Friday. But that's not my preaching. That's not Terry's. That's not the stories Beth tells. That's not the music Jeff plays. Let me make it plain. We gather to celebrate all of life, the fullness of life, to rejoice and to lament, to raise a lamentation, an old-fashioned word, lamentation, to raise to the sky our witness to the reality of suffering and peel back all the false faces of the world. How can we deny the reality of loss when the floor of our sanctuary rises above a crypt where our beloved dead lie? But lamentation is not despair. Everything is beautiful, and I am so sad, says the poet. I am so sad, and everything is beautiful. Both of those things are true, and I carry those words. I carry that conflict, that dilemma, that contradiction inside. Hearing this week that Andy Greeley was admitted to the hospital with coronavirus, I carry those words with me. Hearing that John and Kate Alfonso's whole family was sick with it. Everything is beautiful, and I am so sad. I carry those words with me this week. Hearing that Finley's brother died. Our hearts make a duet of wonder and of grief, both of them fully simultaneous, unceasing, contradicting, and overflowing of life. We're a people who have been baptized in sorrow, each of us submerged into it, coming back to life, all at once, both of those things, adrift and finding our way, alone and inseparably united with each other, this duet of meaning that follows its own hidden tempo over which we have little control. The poet Christine Walters Painters writes, "Do not rush to make meaning. When you smile and say what purpose this all serves, you deny grief a room inside you. You turn away from thousands who cross into the great night alone, from mourners who ache to press one last time against the warm flesh of their beloved. You turn away from the wailing that echoes in the empty room. When you proclaim, 'Who caused this?' I say, pause, rest. Rest in the dark silence first. Sit where sense has vanished, control has slipped away. Sit with futures unraveled, where every drink tastes bitter despite our thirst. When you wish to give a name to that which haunts us, you refuse to sit with the woman who walks the hospital hallway, hears the beeping stop again and again. Do not let your handful of light sting the eyes of those who have bathed in darkness. The models say perhaps 250,000 people will die in this country in the year ahead. Every one of us will know someone who's died of this virus. In the days to come, every one of us will lose someone we know, we love. And when we gather again in person, when we light our chalice in the church building, there will be empty chairs. In our own homes these days, weary with work, or weary with kids, or weary with the loneliness of only our own company, we sit uncertain of our own health, uncertain for the people we love. And on some of these days, I feel overwhelmed, I feel numb, and some days I feel despairing, and some days feeling grateful, and sometimes surprised by joy, and I go to bed exhausted every night after doing less than I thought I would get done. And I wake up to a world whose certainties seem less solid every day. Each of us is weathering this in our own way, alone, together. Each of us carrying these days in our own way, alone, together. At a protest years ago, I saw a sign that read simply, only, what we have in common is that we are heartbroken. What we have in common is that we are heartbroken. In the Christian tradition, this is a week for heartbreak and for hope, from Palm Sunday through Good Friday and on today to Easter. And I don't celebrate these holidays because I believe in the fact of the resurrection. I celebrate today because I believe in the truth of it. The gospel story isn't a historical account to analyze or argue for. It's a story instead that tells us something inarguably real about our own lives. We don't retell this story 2,000 years later because it's about someone else. It tells us something about ourselves. This Holy Week, the Palm Sunday celebration a week ago, a motley, joyful parade, Jesus coming into one side of Jerusalem, a festival of all are welcome and all belong, while on the other side of the city, a Roman military parade marches to reinforce empire. That's a story about us, about which parade we're going to join. On Good Friday, we look squarely at the reality of suffering and despair, at the plain and ugly fact of brokenness of our world. And don't look away or gloss it over with an easy joke or a cheap optimism. That's a story about us. Will we bear witness to the reality of unanswered suffering? And Easter too is our story, finding at what seemed to be the end, a new beginning, and behind a closed door, an empty tomb, ourselves lamenting and coming back to life. In the empty tomb, we discover that the mission of Jesus was not his body. The mission, the message, lives in the work we carry forward. This is the way Unitarians have read the death of Jesus for 200 years and more, for 2,000 years, back in those early days when they were followers of Christ, before there were Christians. He's not coming back, and the work is ours to do. Jesus lived in a province of the Roman Empire where class kept people rigidly separated, where citizenship determined your human rights, where your neighbors were only the people in your neighborhoods, and where the accent and rhythm of speech broadcast to everyone around you, whether you belonged or not. It's the same world we're still living in. And one scholar writes that Jesus, in that space, sought to prepare his people for the inbreaking of the kingdom of heaven. So he set about enacting the messianic banquet among a mixed group of saints and sinners, tax collectors and patrons, women and men, faithful and doubters. His body died, but that mission, the inbreaking of the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of radical equality, that mission lives. Jesus never once said, "Worship me," but he often said, "Follow me, heal the sick, feed the hungry, care for the outcast, the widow, the poor, build the kingdom." Right here, right now, without leaving anybody out, without leaving yourself behind either. His body died, but that mission is alive in us. When he lived, he preached and modeled how to build a community of radical love and radical inclusion, a community where there was space for wonder and for grief, a community that knew how to sit where sense has vanished and control has slipped away, a community that knew love has the last word, even if it doesn't feel like it. His body died, and his call to build a kingdom of equals is alive in us. It's an invitation to resurrection here and now within this life, just as prophets of compassion in every tradition opened a door and made an invitation for us into a new life, a new kind of living. We retell this story because it's still happening, because the door is still open, because the invitation still stands to live into a new world inside this one. What is this thing that has happened to us? Asks the writer Arundhati Roy. What is this thing that's happened to us, this pandemic, our response to it? What is this moment? Roy continues, we are longing for a return to normalcy, trying to stitch our future to our past, and refusing to acknowledge this rupture, the way this pandemic is rupture in our lives. But the rupture exists, and in the midst of this terrible despair, it offers us a chance to rethink the doomsday machine we built for ourselves, this world. Nothing could be worse than a return to normalcy. This pandemic is a portal. It is a gateway between one world and the next, between past and future. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudices and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and our smoky skies. We can choose to walk through it, dragging those behind us, or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world, and ready to fight for it. Jesus goes into Jerusalem knowing he will be betrayed and killed, and goes anyway. knowing also that the mission doesn't die with him. He goes anyway, and when his people gather, there will always be an empty seat, just like there always is for us, too. A people then and now, them and us, joyful and heartbroken, living into an invitation to a whole life that embraces hope and grief, open-eyed and broken-hearted, and deeply in love with this world as it is and as it can become our hope. Our hope is a fierce and an ancient duet of wonder and of grief, a song strong enough to weave a life from. Our hope, our wonder, our grief, our sorrow, our joy, and our heartbrokenness is all the luggage we need to pass through this open door in front of us between the world as it was and the world as it is becoming. Amen.